16.5 million acre-feet. That is the number written into a piece of paper in 1922 that promised 7 states more water than the Colorado River has ever truly carried. And right now, 104 years later, that promise is falling apart in real time. Lake Mead, the largest man-made reservoir in the United States, sits at 1,041 feet above sea level tonight. That is 27% full, half a foot from the lowest point it has ever reached since it was first filled behind Hoover Dam in the 1930s. 300 miles upstream, Lake Powell, the second largest, sits at roughly 3,522 feet. That is 23% full and dropping toward a line where the dam above it can no longer make electricity for 5 million people. Together, the two reservoirs that hold nearly all of the Colorado River's stored water are at their lowest combined level since 1957, back when Lake Powell did not even exist yet, and Glen Canyon Dam was still under construction. There is no modern comparison for what is happening to this system right now, and on July 31st, 2026, 3 days ago, the federal government did something it has been trying to avoid for over a decade. It gave up waiting for the 7 states to agree and released its own plan to decide who gets less water, a plan that none of the states asked for, a plan that none of them are happy with, and a plan that still may not be enough to stop the 2 biggest reservoirs in America from hitting levels where the dams above them stop working altogether. My name is Simon. I cover water systems, infrastructure failures, and the geography stories behind the headlines. And this one has been building for a century. It starts with a number that was wrong from the day it was written down. In November of 1922, representatives from 7 western states gathered at a ranch outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. The meeting was led by Herbert Hoover, then the Secretary of Commerce, years before he became president and years before the dam that would carry his name was even started. The goal was straightforward. The Colorado River ran through or bordered 7 states, and all of them wanted its water. Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. Hoover's job was to broker a deal that split the river fairly. The negotiators looked at the flow records they had. The gauging station at Lee's Ferry, Arizona, the dividing point between the upper and lower halves of the basin, had been measuring the river since 1906. The numbers looked generous. Average flows over those years ran around 16.4 million acre-feet per year. 1 acre-foot is roughly 326,000 gallons, enough to keep 2 average American homes running for a full year. Based on those numbers, the compact split 15 million acre-feet between the 2 halves of the basin, 7.5 million to the upper states and 7.5 million to the lower states. A separate treaty with Mexico in 1944 added another 1.5 million, bringing the total promise to 16.5 million acre-feet every year. It sounded like plenty. It was not. The flow records they used came from what turned out to be an unusually wet stretch of river history. Tree ring researchers, including teams at UCLA and the University of Arizona, later reconstructed Colorado River flows going back to the early 1500s by studying the width of annual growth rings in ancient trees across the basin. What they found upended the entire legal framework of the river. The real long-term average flow at Lee's Ferry was not 16.4 million acre-feet. It was closer to 12 to 13 million. The period the compact negotiators measured happened to capture some of the wettest decades the river had seen in centuries. They built an entire legal system for sharing a river on what amounted to a statistical fluke. The compact promised roughly 25 to 30% more water than the river has ever reliably carried. Some scientists at the time raised concerns. They warned that the data window was too short and too generous to base a permanent deal on. But the political momentum was too strong. 7 states had finally agreed on something, and nobody wanted to reopen negotiations with smaller, less comfortable numbers. So they signed it, they celebrated it, and they built an entire civilization on top of it. For decades, it did not matter that the math was wrong because the system had a savings account. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, filled during the early wet years, held enough stored water to cover the gap between what the states took out and what the river put in. The states were spending more than the river earned, but the account had cushion. That cushion is now nearly gone, and once a savings account approaches zero, every shortfall shows up immediately. Between late July 2025 and late July 2026, Lake Mead and Lake Powell lost a combined 3.04 million acre-feet of water. That is almost exactly the maximum single-year cut that the federal government's new plan even allows. The system is losing water at a pace that matches the deepest